And away we go. Thank you for coming to the Locknote session, Black Hat 2016. Thanks. Anybody have a good time here? Yeah. Woo! Anybody drink the... Anybody have the free beers? Anybody have a spare free beer? Because I could really use one right now. So if anybody could bring me one, that would be great. So I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on next. This is the Locknote as opposed to the keynote, where we try to summarize some of the topics that we saw at Black Hat, some of the threads, some of the things we've heard in conversation. And then what's going to happen is I'm just going to have a conversation with the other people up here, and you're going to kind of listen in how we were approaching the topics and what we're thinking to give you a little insight, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, and we're going to bring you into the conversation. And it's going to take about 45 minutes, and I've got some statistics to tell you a little bit about how the conference has turned out here. Every year I like to do this normally at the keynote, but we're doing it at the closing. So we had 57 different countries represented here. So that was a lot more international than I anticipated. And in continuing the Black Hat tradition of giving away sponsorships or fellowships to students or academics. Generally people write white papers or research papers, and we review them, and then we give away free admission to try to help foster people who wouldn't normally be able to attend. And this year we gave away 100 free passes to academics and researchers and students. So if anybody is here who got in on one of those, can you raise your hand? Right, let's hear it for them. Thank you. Well done. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you the top 10 countries that only have one person here. So Azerbaijan sent a person, Bahrain, Bermuda, Costa Rica, Kuwait, Latvia, Nigeria, Reunion, which I'm not sure what country that is, Slovenia, and the Ukraine. So thank you for coming all the way. You are the sole representative of your country. So I hope you ask good questions later. So with that said, I'd like to first draw some attention to one of our key sponsors, Cylance, and I want to introduce Anton, who's going to say a couple of words, and then we're going to start off the Locknote. So thank you very much. Anton.
Thanks very much. Actually, I got a confession. I did have one of the free beers, so this might be slightly longer than 2 minutes, which is what I was planning. So my observations over the past couple of days is that we have some super smart people gathered here today, a lot smarter than I am. And I did my AI research many, many years ago, so that's a big confession for me to make as well. What I'm seeing, though, is there's a lot of specific and essential specialized expertise that we have to fight the sort of current cybersecurity landscape. And this specificity is part of the problem. The specificity that we need, and you can use whatever analogy you want. You know, once the bullet's left the gun, once the genie's out of the bottle, once the worms are out of the can, we've got more and more problems within our networks. And those problems, in AI terms, that's a combinatorial explosion. We end up with more and more things that we need to do. And really that trend has also added to the general cybersecurity trend of moving away from prevention and through to detection and response. But by doing that, we've sort of tilted the boat a little bit and maybe too far one way. And obviously I'm going to say this because I'm from Cylance, but I think the good news is, even with the skills shortage, and I think after Black Hat in the States, there was a survey, one of the top problems was finding enough specialist people like yourselves with the right knowledge and the right tools in order to combat malware in our systems. But from some of the sessions, in fact, the session immediately prior to this one, we've started thinking about machine learning and artificial intelligence. That might be the key to actually helping redress the balance. So let's get back to some good prevention, allow our specialists, our scarce specialists, in order to focus on the detection and response, and rebalance our boat a little bit away from the tilt that we've got at the moment. So that's my hope. 20 years ago, when I was doing my research, we thought we were on the edge of something really spectacular. We weren't. We were actually a solution looking for a problem, and mostly in very poorly controlled domains. At the moment, I think this is the time. This is the time for machine learning and artificial intelligence to make a change. But thanks very much.
Introduce the panelists up here on my right, starting from my right. What's that? Stage right? Your left. Daniel Cuthbert. We have Sharon Conhedy, myself, Jeff Moss, and Chris Weitz-Opel. And we're going to talk about, I've got a question in mind for each one of us specifically, but then we're going to just have a conversation. I'm going to start with a question with Daniel, on the IP bill, or the Snoopers charter here in the UK. And it seems to be a reflection of what's happening in a lot of countries, whether it's China, Australia, the United States, this sort of anxiety by government that it's getting away from them. Right? They can't get their hands around this new type of cybercrime, espionage, whatever it is. They're feeling like existing tools aren't working for them. They need new capabilities, right? Whether this is the FBI being stressed out about going dark, or the Apple iPhone. And so legislators are rushing to give new powers, new tools to law enforcement. And some of the questions are, is it the right tool for the job? Is it that the expectation from law enforcement is wrong? It's that law enforcement wants it to be easy. We want the answers to land in our lap in a clearly formatted XML file, and they don't want to have to do the legwork. Or is this like legitimate concern, and these are sort of the time's call for these solutions? So you're much more up to speed on the specifics in the UK, but I think this is a larger problem, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the IP bill has a lot of emotion around it. 25 years ago, hacking, you'd never expect it to be in the 6 o'clock news. And it kind of changed with TalkTalk. When you had the big boss of TalkTalk on the BBC News at 6 o'clock, because they were breached, this is now in the public eye. And I think there's two camps that are taking abuse of this. There's the criminality, and we've seen it with what's happening in Russia, criminality as a service.
Taking abuse of what?
Abusing the fact that law enforcement just don't have these capabilities.
Right. Okay.
We saw that with the ransomware. Incredibly lame. Like it's not a fancy thing. DOS attacks are lame. Yeah. But criminals are abusing this because they know that law enforcement just don't have the capability. Can't respond. They have no what they're doing because it's not traditional policing. And then they have the fact that an area that I'm quite passionate about is the child exploitation.
Oh, turn off your phones.
We've got unfortunately, the UK is a big player in the world of child exploitation, and it's a rather sick thing. And law enforcement don't know how to act because they're using all the privacy tools that you guys mostly use, Tor, all the privacy distros, etc. And it's very hard if you're law enforcement trying to take down a ring that's responsible for, say, 200 gigs worth of indecent images a month, when they don't have that capability. So the IP bill, I don't envy anybody who's got to try and write a law, because you're not going to make it perfect for everybody. And indeed, the IP bill has got some awful parts of it. But there's some parts that are trying to make this better, such as...
So do you think, we see this a lot in the United States, they try to bite off the whole thing in one go.
Yeah.
They're not trying to do it in incremental steps, like we'll address this one, we'll address this one. There's this sense that we have to get it all right now. And instead, you end up with kind of like a half measure.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that with IP bill. You've got a law that relates to the intelligence services with bulk collection, and it tries to detail how they're going to handle that, which is great. You've got a law that details how law enforcement goes after active exploitation. So this is proper traditional intercept. We found a suspect, we've got a warrant, we want to go after them as pen testers or hackers would do. But then it's also got laws that say, well, the internet connections record. We want ISPs to store metadata. As we saw with Dave's talk, like metadata is seemingly harmless until you start joining the dots. So it's a law that's trying to appease everybody, and I think that's where the problems start to lie. It's very, very vague.
Yeah. So then as technologists, I mean, where our intersection is as this law passes in the UK, how does that impact us? Does it impact makers of tools? Does all of a sudden you can't run Tor anymore? I mean, how does it impact our community?
So it's interesting that one of the key things that a lot of the press centered on was the fact that the backdooring of encryption. And the law went through three changes, and it's now past the third time, so it's about to be made law. And what the encryption part says was a company that builds encryption should try and help the police if there's a warrant, and they've got the
it's like
oversight.
the best efforts kind of
Best effort.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people are reading is that it doesn't mean you have to backdoor the encryption. It means if you've got the capability, if you've got an encrypted database and you've got the key, try and help them unlock that. It's not put a backdoor on everything. Indeed, the law's vague. I think a lot of people are reading into that too much.
Yeah. And so then, do you think that's going to change? I've heard some complaints from ISPs where they say it's going to be so expensive, we're going to have to store so much data. And once you start aggregating that data, it's like now you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Now the economies of scale that would be a really tempting target. I mean, imagine if you're an investigative reporter, or in the United States, it would be, let's say you're in a lawsuit, a divorce, a messy divorce with your wife. They perform discovery because they're trying to find out if you're cheating and you have hidden money somewhere. Well, now you go to your ISP and you can get the browsing history of your wife or your husband for the last 5 years. That's going to be abused unless you can restrict it, right?
So thankfully, the law does restrict who has access to ICRs, Internet Connection Records, generally the police. But there's one slight area that concerns me in that other bodies, other public bodies have access to that. And as we all know,
Tax authorities.
there's a whole list, and it's really worrying because traditionally these bodies have not been very good at securing stuff. And as an industry, we really suck at making stuff secure. So it's only inevitable before the ICR breach happens and everything you browse. Now the ICR records are interesting. It's not the contents of the site you're browsing, it's the site you visited. So we know that you visited Tinder or Reddit or something else at this date and time.
Yeah, that part bothers me a little bit. I want to turn to you.
Sure.
Any thoughts on this?
On this topic?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really came to light for me with the Apple, FBI case.
Yeah.
That really, and it just remains sort of unresolved, right? So
Right.
it just seems like something that's just going to keep hanging out there. But because of the way that is, I think more people that are designing systems are going to design them such that they don't have the keys.
Right.
Like Apple has sort of set this standard.
Yeah, the sort of design yourself out of the problem.
Design yourself out of the problem. Like, I will save money as a business. I won't have complaints from customers if I don't have the capability. And this is something that, security people have been saying that's a good security design, right, for a long, long time. And now it seems like it's also a good, customer relationship and sort of political
Legal,
design,
yeah.
because you're not fighting your own law enforcement, and you're not in arguments constantly with your own law enforcement.
Right. Any thoughts?
I think in ways it's been a strange and disappointing week for the average member of the British public. First of all, they told us that you voted wrong in Brexit, and now they're saying, well, your data, it's not really yours anyway.
Right.
And you're not even going to cash in and get a discount on your car insurance for it.
Right, yeah, which we're definitely going to get to, because that's now what happens with that metadata. And so what I'm wondering, in the United States, we have the First Amendment, and one of the big questions is, can you build a secure system? Is that permissible under this bill? If you build a system that doesn't retain the metadata, or there's no logs to keep, are they going to force you to turn on all the logs? If the product is designed to not have logs, is that permissible? And so there's this unresolved question in the United States: can you legally build a totally secure system? Or are you going to be forced to always have this sort of exceptional access? So I don't know how that is even playing out.
So we've actually got a case. Everybody knows Moxie Marlinspark. Everybody here should be using Signal. 2-3 weeks ago, he shared I believe it was an FBI subpoena for connection records. And he said, here it is. And it was a 2-line saying, epoch time connected, epoch time disconnected. That's it. That's all I stored. Like he met with the conditions, but it didn't give actually anything. And I think that's probably maybe used as the first example of a secure messaging system that just doesn't store anything. Right. I don't know what's happened to Moxie since. Yeah. I don't know if he's had a quick visit by somebody in Vans, but we'll find out. Blackout USA.
Yeah. So now I want to talk a little bit about this metadata question. So let's say we do generate this metadata. There was this Admiral insurance case that got a fair bit of media coverage, and I guess what they were doing is using data from Facebook, the API Facebook, to gather information and metadata that was useful to their insurance actuarial tables. And then they were starting to apply that to their customer base, which is clearly not what Facebook was intending when they were gathering this data. Or maybe Facebook got a little jealous that they weren't monetizing your data in that way. So why don't you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, from what I understand, Facebook have disabled this app in light of all the public uproar about it. But it was an opt-in solution for first-time drivers to give access to their social media profiles so that...
So you had to click a box that said, or you went to your insurance company site and gave them your login.
As part of the quote. So they would look just during the quote process. So they claimed there was no ongoing access to the data.
Okay, so one-time peak.
Yeah, exactly. So they claimed. And this could result in reductions to your car insurance of up to £350 a year, which is quite significant. Not giving away your data for nothing in this case.
Yeah.
And they claimed that there wouldn't be any increases in insurance premiums for it.
Only decreases.
Yeah.
Only the benefits.
Yeah, so what they're saying is we're going to make less money if you give us your data, and someone's going to pay for that somewhere along the line.
Right.
So is it the people who don't opt in to do this who are going to pay for it?
Right.
But also what's fascinating about it is the data they were actually looking for. So at first glance, it had nothing whatsoever to do with your driving skills. There was a case in the UK earlier this year where someone posted on Twitter something along the lines of, lol, I just clipped a cyclist.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah. So if they were collecting that kind of data, you could nearly understand it. But they are looking at personality traits that correspond to safe drivers. And the personality traits that they've outlined are really interesting. It's stuff like...
Do you have a cat?
Are you conscientious? So do you write in bullet point lists? Do you use proper grammar? Do you arrange to meet with your friends at a certain time and place, rather than just saying vaguely tonight, which from a security perspective, posted on social media that you're going out to a certain place at a certain time doesn't say conscientious to me. But there's all kinds of fascinating things that they're collecting, not necessarily about driving.
And it also turned out they were doing this in an ongoing fashion?
Well, they would look at your historical data. I mean, this I'm not sure really got off the ground, but I'm sure it will eventually.
Right. So it reminds me of back in the United States, Netflix, years ago, released a set of anonymized data of like viewer behavior, and then I think AOL did that, and Comcast, and a lot of these companies were trying to do the right thing, sharing large data sets with the community, with the public, and then academic community and other people would analyze it and use it for some public good. And in every case, every large data set got de-anonymized. And so it brings up this question of, can we even share this data for public good without it getting de-anonymized or becoming so anonymous that it's essentially useless? And I've heard people talk about putting data into giant pools. Apple's got something where they're trying to take your data and put you into a giant pool, and then they claim they can't figure out who the individuals are. But I'm curious, from a security standpoint, or your perspective, where does this lead? I mean, is this yet a new thing we'll have to be worried about?
Yeah, I think absolutely it is. And I've been to several talks at Black Hat Europe over the last couple of days that have talked about the importance of metadata. Yeah. And I love the example that several talks have given about the Uber Ride of Glory, which has been a brilliant example of how Uber is using the information, what kind of great information you can get from that. And yeah, I worry about what information we're giving away on a day-to-day basis as we become increasingly more connected. And people just aren't really that worried about it if they're going to save £350.
And I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on this?
On the metadata issue?
Yeah, because I'm really curious that, like security, you don't feel the pain of your decisions quickly. Like, we'll touch the hot plate, immediate feedback. But how would you ever know that that post you made on Facebook 6 months ago just cost you 20 quid? Like, you can't connect the action with the consequence, and so therefore, to our brains, it doesn't exist.
Well, one aspect of it, especially with Facebook, I mean, Facebook's been around for like 10 years now, and so you're just getting more and more of a percentage of a person's lifetime is there, and I don't think they actually ever really delete anything, do they, if you've put it in there? I think they even record...
Well, can you imagine everybody that started when they're 16 and now they're 26?
So they even yeah, exactly, and Facebook even records when you type a note, and then you decide I don't really want to post that. Like you think about it and you say I don't want to post that, and you cancel.
Yeah, you all control H's
or you delete it. They record that. So I mean the amount of data is pretty amazing, and I don't know if we quite have the implications of that yet. But then joining it with other data sets, and that's when you can't really tell what the implications of a Facebook post is, because you don't know what someone else is going to, other data sets they're going to join that with. Right. So it's kind of like you say, it's just a problem that we just don't know the impact of it yet.
Yeah, that immediacy or lack of immediacy, I'm wondering if that's just something we're going to be hobbled with as a society, because we can't make that connection. And a security engineer was trying to figure out for safe browsing. Remember when everybody was concerned about safe browsing, like that was going to save us? And they were saying that, when you drive your car and you reach a certain speed, sometimes auto engineers build in that the steering wheel shakes. And it gives you feedback like, hey, you're doing something dangerous. So the idea was, what if you're like mousing over a dangerous link and your mouse goes like, like, hey, that's bad. Don't click on that. We don't have those kind of cues. And I think the worst is the metadata, because you're not even saying I'm sharing my data. It's like an abstracted concept. And I think that where do the bad guys go with this? Like, these are the Facebooks of the world. What about, does this have any implication in the underground economy or in the criminal economies? Because right now the only people that seem to be able to monetize this are legit businesses that are potentially regulated. I'm just curious what happens when it breaks out of that world into another. And I think some people were talking about the earlier talk on mobile security, and how in some darknet markets, people were buying or creating fake companies to get access to the interconnect network, and then they were selling access to that, but they would be able to collect metadata on where each mobile device is and what the mobile numbers are. And so now if there's like a parallel sort of metadata dark market, and
I'd be surprised if there wasn't.
Yeah, there must be.
Evil marketing companies.
Yeah. Is there anything that's not an evil marketing company? I mean, is there like a non-evil marketing company?
I don't want to annoy the marketers. They're quite,
They are powerful.
Give me Russian hackers any day. Yeah.
There was the head of marketing I worked at Secure Computing. I just remember this quote from her. She said, "I'm wasting half of my marketing budget. I just don't know which half." That's a famous marketing quote. That's how they think. I'm losing money somewhere. I just don't know where. So I've got a question for you, Chris. Longtime hacker, and you said one of your talks you really were interested in here was the rootkits, the persistence on PLCs,
Sure.
These embedded devices with limited constrained resources. And we started looking at PLCs and ICS stuff 8 years plus ago, and I just figured that had been farmed out. Greenfield was gone there, pretty well understood space. Now we're into other things. We're into IoT devices. But the hits keep on coming with PLCs.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed was just in general at the conference, there was just more and better tooling around, Internet of Things, hacking firmware, hacking cars,
the reverse engineering around it's getting better.
Yeah, so it's just, it does keep improving. And so that means that there's obviously a lot of vulnerabilities to be found if these people are building tools. Right. And one thing that I've just learned over time is until there's enough sufficient tools out there to attack a particular platform, it just doesn't get fixed.
Because you have to demonstrate to the manufacturer.
Exactly.
And they don't believe you until there's like an overwhelming amount of evidence? Or?
Well, at the loft, we used to call it making the theoretical practical. Right.
Yeah.
Until you can do that, then nothing really changes. And
so this goes back to unless you burn your hand on the stove, you can tell them that it's hot all day long.
Exactly. So, when Windows first came out, when Microsoft said, Windows is more secure than Unix because it doesn't have all those Unix vulnerabilities. Like tools like Crack don't work. And we took that as a challenge at the Loft, and we built Loft Crack because we said, come on, of course you can crack Windows passwords. And it turned out that they were actually weaker than the DES encryption. So until you can actually demonstrate something, things don't change. And I think that we all understand that in the industry. So I think some of the work with the PLAs shows...
PLA? You want to tell me something?
The PLCs.
Oh, okay.
is showing that there is a significant problem still with the infrastructure that's been deployed, and so these guys, what they did was they essentially built a PLC rootkit. They built something that could be resident in memory, and it would cut the PLC's I/O. So the connection between the virtual I/O port, which is a little memory element that is storing the state of the pin, and the actual hardware pin setting. The actual pin setting. So the software thinks the pin setting is what it last was.
Because it's not a physical connection
when they
anymore.
disconnected it. And also, if it was to write, it thinks it's writing just fine, but it's just writing to the memory, and it's actually not writing to the pin. So you've basically isolated the software from the outside world, which means two things. You could potentially run. You can't detect.
Change the state of the device, and nobody would be able to remotely tell.
Exactly. And so these guys, they did it first on the Raspberry Pi. They said, well, the Raspberry Pi has this kind of I/O hardware architecture that PLCs do, and Raspberry Pis are cheap and easy, right? So they did it on the Raspberry Pi, and they showed it, and they said, look, we have a PLC rootkit. And the first thing people said was, no, you have a Raspberry Pi rootkit.
Right.
And they said, but look, here the documentation, it uses the same chips, it uses the same whatever. No, it's not a problem with PLCs, it's a problem with the Raspberry Pi. So they had to actually make their rootkit. They had to order a PLC and make their rootkit and demonstrate that to get the manufacturers to do something.
So I'm curious, because you've been around long enough to see the trajectory of sort of exploitation and fixes. So are these devices constrained enough, small enough, that it doesn't have an unlimited amount of bugs? A lot of these devices are small enough. Is it possible to harden the PLC? Like, you can drain the swamp if you hammer on it long enough? Or is it sort of like there's just bugs are dense and you're just going to keep finding them? Or is there a benefit to this because you go through this 5 generations and all of a sudden you've squeezed out all these?
No, I think there's still a lot of bugs. And also one of the problems is they don't have the exploit mitigation capabilities that a modern OS does.
So even though they're running less code, they're still dense enough.
You can do a straight stack overflow, that kind of thing. And if the code wasn't written with security in mind, of course there's going to be vulnerabilities.
Right. None of you guys have jumped in here.
I think there's one exception to your argument. 98, a fellow friend of ours released SQL injection. Then Bernardo wrote SQL Map, which to millions of skiddies around the world thought we're leap pwnage people. We still not fixed that problem. So I'm wondering if the argument of the tools are there, people are going to fix the problem is still valid, because we're still making the same mistakes. I mean, Internet of Things, it's not new bugs. I mean, the whole idea of stunt hacking, you're owning a dildo connected to the internet, well done, but you're still using a flaw from 15 years ago, and the tools are there. So I'm wondering if it's not a case of it's too cheap to fix, but people are just accepting the risk.
Well, the example of SQL injection, people who want to write software that's SQL injection free can, and they do. So, when's the last time you heard of a major bank having a SQL injection vulnerability? It just doesn't happen anymore for people that are actually trying.
Yeah.
Of course, people who are writing dating websites aren't trying so hard. And it's actually kind of surprising that TalkTalk didn't try, because they were there. But people are still affected by SQL injection because our data is in all these different websites out there, dating sites and places that don't care. So people don't think about it and are impacted by it. But I think businesses that care about it can do that.
There is recourse. You could, if you wanted to. Where on the PLC, you just can't.
You can't today, but hopefully at some point, power companies will say, we're only buying PLCs that don't have this problem.
Well, let's hope the ICR websites that ISPs use Veracode to make sure they're not vulnerable to SQLi.
I think it's a great idea.
There you go.
You're going to have to pay me for that later.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the part where we have people with microphones in the audience. I want to open it up to some questions. Anything goes. It doesn't have to be on these 3 subjects. It can be on anything. And we're happy to talk about it. And if we don't get any questions, then we're going to just keep talking amongst ourselves. So if you have a question, please stand up or raise your hand, and we'll get you a microphone. I'm blinded, so I can't tell what's going on.
No.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Oh.
Hi, a general question. With the hacks that we've seen attributed to Russia of the DNC amongst other organizations. This is old school stuff, as as in very simple. Do we? What do we do about this? Do we need to get rid of email? Any reaction to the fact that theoretically elections are being influenced by the breach of very easy to use but easy to hack tools?
Yeah, I mean, one of my fears with the election hacking is that even though like the voting machines might be physically separated, that the election tabulation and management systems where they take the memory cards and put it, those are separated. If you look at the what makes up an election management system, it's like an Oracle database, some Windows workstations. It's common business computing stuff. And that all needs to be patched and upgraded and managed, and data has to be brought back and forth on removable media, right? So I think the same kind of air gap jumping that happened in Stuxnet is very possible to happen with election management systems, and that's also not that sophisticated either. I mean, I saw it on Mr. Robot, right? So it's easy to do.
Well, and it's interesting too what you said about basic techniques. I mean, that's perfect MO of some of these of the nation state actors. Only use the least amount of effort necessary to achieve your aims. Why reveal you have a greater capability when the most basic will work? And keep doing the most basic until it gets fixed. Why reveal anything more about your capability? And by keeping it a low level, it's more deniable. Look, anybody can do this. Why are you signaling out us, poor Russians? And
Was it the Russians? Attribution's hard.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
we should just give up. Yeah, don't bother trying to.
It's always
attribute.
China.
And so I think what it's done, at least in the States, is it's made all of our jobs that much more serious. Now they're not only going to turn to us on fixing the database, now they're going to be asking us to help fix election systems, things that underpin our societies. And so the spotlight has never been on our community to a greater degree than right now. It used to be that we would talk about, if only the boards and CEOs would ask our opinion, we would just tell them how it is and they'd fix everything. Well, now you've got policy people asking us. And so I think that's, to me, whether it influences the election or not, there's 1,000 people talking about that. It's about, how do we respond to it as a community, and how do we prevent this in the future? I mean, election systems are never going to be as secure as an ATM. And ATMs our community are breaking into all the time. So I don't hold out much hope on the technology side. Another question? Or I'm sorry, did I cut any of you guys off? Okay, over here.
I want to return back a little bit to the PLCs and industrial controls in general, because I think there's a difference there between other types of systems, because PLCs have such a long life. You mentioned 8 years ago, we started 8 years ago to look into their security. You are only half through the life of a PLC deployed in a factory. How do we solve that problem? Because let's think about it. If we create PLCs now with new defenses, new mitigations, and so forth, can we say that they won't be vulnerable to something 10 years from now, some new techniques that will be developed in the meantime? How do we solve that problem, even if we create...
Let me summarize I'll summarize the question for people who couldn't hear it. So it's essentially, PLCs are different than normal computing devices because they have such a long lifespan, 8 years, 10 years plus. And we see this now starting with the Internet of Things. It's like the long tail problem. I've heard it in Washington, D.C. referred to as the ladder problem, where you actually need to get a ladder out to get to the device to try to fix it. And so by show of hands here, how many people have replaced their phone in the last 3 years? Right? How many people have replaced your smoke detector in the last 3 years? Right? The average lifespan of a smoke detector is about a decade. And the cost of replacing some of these things are greater than the cost of the thing. And so in the long tail on these PLCs are like 15 years. What do we do?
15 years. I've heard, I have one customer that makes industrial systems, and they said they have products that they sold 50 years ago that are still in operation in power plants that have...
I thought capacitors broke down after that amount of time.
I don't know, but maybe that's exaggeration, but it's way more than 10 years. It's clearly 20 or 30 year lifetime on on a lot of this stuff. I mean, look at, airplanes, right? They have like a 30-year lifetime. So whenever you put, computers into devices, you're extending the life that system has to be secure very far into the future. So I think, the solution, one of the major parts of that solution is you need to have a secure updating mechanism where you can securely update. Like the device typically, not always, but typically can only be hacked if it is connected to a network. So use that capability to make the device updatable. But there's so many devices out there that just aren't updatable. I mean, in the industrial control system space, you hear of bugs, really critical bugs being found, like there's like a hard-coded password, and the manufacturer says, like, we don't support that, and there's no way to update it.
Yeah.
So, and now you
Kind of
just have
like,
to isolate the systems from the internet.
Kind
Is
of
the
like
only solution.
Google with their older Android devices. Yeah.
Like 2-year-old Google.
Yeah.
2-year-old.
We've come across plenty of boxes that are, especially in heavy industry, running Windows.
311.
Still works, don't turn it off, please don't take the plug out.
That's right.
But how do you update it? Most people today wouldn't even recognize Windows 3.11, but it's there, it's doing its job, it does it 24/7, it just works.
Yeah, isolation.
But vulnerability, as hell.
And I've heard of, I'm curious on your take on this. I've heard of some people, I've heard two answers. One is you need to update. And if you need to update, all I hear is giant PKI, which scares me a little bit because if your manufacturer loses their key, or in 15 years there's a change.
Anyone can update it.
Anybody can update it. So, I mean, it's better than nothing, but now every manufacturer has to be a PKI master.
Yeah, so I said secure update and kind of glossed over how hard that part
So
is.
that sounds super scary. But then the other one is like on the latest giant denial of service attack, when there were these IP cameras, people have been talking about, we'll rate limit. So even if the machines are compromised, they can only do a limited amount of harm. But that doesn't help you in this PLC case because the harm is in making the device malfunction, not in denial of service.
Right. I think we have to explore the thing of like restricting what the device can do somehow to what it was designed to do.
Do you remember?
But I don't have a good answer. But I think that is a sort of a path forward here.
Do you remember back in the days building your own PC? And if you want to do a flash update, you used to have to put a physical jumper to reflash. And old SCSI drives had a physical hardware write protect thing. Like, wouldn't it be nice if the PLCs have a hardware write protect?
Yeah, we got the software loaded, put the hardware.
Put that and
write
it's
protect on.
fixed, right? But somebody removed those pins because it saved them half a penny. And now we have no protection.
Or it was customer support calls. I can't update my software. Open the box and
remove the jumper, yeah. I'm wondering if we're going to see a resurgence of these sort of physical protections because we've realized the software protections are not cutting it.
There's a business
We
idea.
have we have a question over here?
I think something that's interesting over the last couple of years is we're seeing more and more kind of hardware exploits, which are not bugs in the hardware per se, the design working as intended, but that introducing new vulnerabilities. I'm thinking about things like row hammer and cache timing vulnerabilities and so forth. Do you think we need to start thinking about more drastic changes to how we manage the hardware in the way that we do with operating systems, like active mitigations and active monitoring and so forth in the hardware and the ability to actually, patch hardware?
Patch hardware. Well, I know some of the people at the Intel security team, their whole vision is bake in security into the hardware. Now, whether it's done accurately or not, but if you see some of the new CPU and memory protections, you can see this is clearly the road Intel is going down. I don't know about, you're the expert on.
Well, I think that's good. I think that there's some limitations there, but I think the hardware being aware of some security properties of the system and sort of monitoring that is something important.
I'm always curious on when you're provisioning cloud and you're rebooting and refreshing, I guess, a device in the cloud, are they reflashing the video and the network and does everything get cleanly reflashed when you reprovision a cloud server? I don't think so.
Well, you can't jump out of the virtual machine, so what are you worried about?
No, but yeah.
I think the hardware thing's interesting. If you look at Samsung's recent marketing hoo-ha with the Note 7, I flew out of Joburg the other week, and they had a gentleman there whose sole job was to swap out the hardware. because obviously the planes don't let you fly with
He
it.
like stands at the gate
Yeah.
of the airplane and takes your Note
Yeah,
7.
you get a Note, so you give in your Note 7. I don't know how they do the backup type thing, but you get some other Samsung phone. And that's the problem with hardware. How do you swap it out? If you can't update it, does somebody walk around, drive around? The logistics of physically swapping out hardware is really, really hard.
Yeah, it's the latter problem. How do you find it all? I mean, once it's installed and then you change jobs and 5 years later somebody has to find your embedded wireless thing in the building, you're never going to find it again. No. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question, or I want to hear your thoughts about what I think we are doing something wrong as industry professionals, because we have been talking, for example, telling people for many years, please do backup, please take care of your data, etc., secure your stuff. And it took ransomware this year to actually people start caring about backups and checking that the backups actually worked. And it took ransomware to make normal people to actually verify that. And so I think that I feel that for the last 10 years it was kind of a waste of time, or we are doing something wrong because our message is not kind of getting there, right?
Right.
So what do you think about that?
Originally, for a brief period in time, I thought that end user education was the key, and now I've given up on it. I mean, Stop, Think, Connect, or whatever, stop, one of the logos in the United States to try to raise security awareness. I don't think that's going to work. I've used like the FishMe type services to try to educate you. I love that, but I don't think in the end it's going to really make much of a difference. Like, my mom should not be a computer security expert to use her computer. She should assume, like when she gets in a car, highly technical, sophisticated piece of machinery, she just assumes it's going to work. She's purchased it, she's a consumer, the computer should be safe. And I think that's the kind of environment we should be striving for, not teaching you like everything else in life works one way, but when you get near a computer, it's completely different. I don't know if that's unrealistic in my thinking, but that's where I've gone.
I think that that's the I actually learned when I gave a talk in Chile that the word for security and safety is the same in Spanish. And so I think we need to think more like these systems have to be safe, which means you don't have to be an expert to operate it safely. Like, there's equipment that you have to be trained in, and you have to do everything exactly right, or you lose a limb, right? like there's equipment like that out there in the real world that's not safe equipment, but consumer equipment is very safe because of liability and the expectation that even a young child might have
Get their hands on it.
So I think that's how we have to think about, computer technology.
You almost need in the UK, you've got the kite logo. That means it's been tested a toaster. If I touch the toaster, I don't want to get shocked. That's pretty basic. It's early morning, I'm not awake. We need the same for a device. And we were talking about this with our phones.
Right.
You buy an iPhone or a Google Pixel and you accept that you're paying £800 or whatever. You almost need a food standards type thing. This phone does this, sends this data out to these places, so you're more aware. Okay.
You know what you're buying.
Yeah, you know what you're buying.
Yeah, I'm really curious on the acceptance of risk, I guess, and expecting my mom to know all the risks she's accepting when she clicks on a link is unrealistic. And so I think we should approach it in a different, maybe more simplified way. And I think what's going to happen is, you touched on the liability. I think what's going to happen with Internet of Things, all of this computing infrastructure with cars, PLCs, it is at arm's distance from the average consumer. To them, the closest they get to the technology is maybe a phone in their hands where they're interacting, or maybe a laptop. Now, with the Internet of Things, it's going to be in there. It's going to be everywhere. And when those things start malfunctioning and start causing harm, I don't think the consumers are going to be down with the shrink-wrap software license and being told that they accept the risk of this internet toaster burning down their house. And that's the difference, is the technology is not at arm's distance. It's intertwined with their life now. And that's, I think, going to be another huge challenge for us as a community, because as soon as those toasters start burning down houses, we're going to have to start explaining it, and legislators, government's going to want to, quote unquote, solve the problem. And if industry can't solve it, which I'm uncomfortable, I don't think they can, because bullets out of the gun, so to speak, that means we're going to have to learn when we touch the hot plate. That's really doom and gloom because I don't like regulation, but correct me if I'm wrong, do you think that's the road we're going down?
I think we're heading that way, and I think it's inevitable. We kind of failed as an industry. We struggle to build secure, stable, safe things. We've given it a good chance, but need some kind of kick up the arse.
Are we going to close it on a kick up the ass? Or?
No, I worry about the same thing. Like with medical equipment, do we need someone to die because of ransomware?
Right.
And so I think things would improve if someone died, but that's a horrible way to
why do we have to learn
make
that
the
way as a
solution.
society? Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much. We're going to be around for a little bit. I want to thank you for coming out, listening to our Locknote. And if you have any feedback on the conference or you want to get in touch with any of the speakers, just send Black Hat, send us an email. We'd love to get your feedback. We always are constantly trying to improve, and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you so much.